but it's important to have an efficient government, not a big government, an efficient government. What's your thoughts on that?
I think there's a lot of wisdom in what you're saying. We have to remember a number of things about government. Rule number one, the government cannot give you anything that it hasn't taken away. The government has no money. There is no magic pot of gold to which the government has monopolistic access. All the money government spends comes from the people, either by taxing today or taxing tomorrow to pay off the debts of today. There is no government money. Justin Trudeau has no money other than his personal private trust fund. That's just for him. He has no money. So he gives you nothing. There is absolutely nothing Justin Trudeau or his government can or do give you. Everything they offer comes from the people in the first place. That's the first and most important rule, because oftentimes people get the perception that government has these magical alchemist powers to create gold from lead and disperse that gold for the riches of all. In fact, all the government does is takes away and then gives some of what it took back. So that's the first thing people need to remember. The second is that government is, or should be, servant and not master. The government should be servant and not master. My job in opposition, as a member of the House of Commons, is to bring the mighty low, to remind them that they are mere servants of the people. The word minister means servant. That is the origin of the word. Prime Minister means first servant. It does. So a lot of people, and especially those in power, have flipped the org chart upside down. They think that in our parliamentary system that you have the Prime Minister on top, and then ministers, and then the House of Commons, and then the people. It's exactly the opposite of that. It's the people on top, and then the House of Commons, which works for the people, and under the House of Commons you have the Prime Minister. He is at the bottom of the org chart, because to stay in power he needs the confidence of the House of Commons, and for the House of Commons to stay, it needs the confidence of the people. So we need to constantly remind our leaders that they are not our bosses, that they are servants and not masters. So when people sometimes say, Pierre, you're too aggressive in the House of Commons, can you get along in that place? So the answer is, our job is not to get along with powerful people. Our job is not to make the powerful feel more comfortable. The most powerful people in the country should tremble every time they walk in the doors of the House of Commons to face the people. And so the questions should be tough. They should be factual. Yes, professional, never personal, but tough and factual, because the decisions that politicians make to wield the power, the awesome power of government, affect the lives of ordinary people. It is the job of the commoners in the House to restrain that power, make sure it's never in excess. So we need to restrain the power of government to maximize the power of the common people.
You know, sir, thank you. And I want you to do this all the way through this, because what you're doing, I did a podcast recently, and it was EFA187, and it was the Integrity March, Firearms March. These gentlemen that I know, businessmen that I've known for over a decade, a clinician that I worked with, and he was coming to Ottawa, and he's telling me he was coming to Ottawa, and then with these gentlemen and doing the Integrity March. And I'm not a firearm owner. I've never owned a firearm. I was one of those individuals that used to be against it until I got educated when I was young. And I got educated because I worked at the Rideau Correctional Treatment Center at that time, and they were all hunters, men and women. And I got educated on firearms and what are firearms and the sport of firearms and so on and so forth. And then a lot of the incidents that transpired from that time going forward, they were in Ottawa to march and it was a peaceful march, a beautiful march, an integrity march, right? And from respectful individuals. When I did that podcast that night, I wanted to do it because I want to educate people, right? It's our duty to teach, but it's also our duty to learn. And when I was delivering that podcast, one of the calls that I got a lot of conversation came from it, but one of the calls was an individual and he told me, another business peer, and he said, I cringe when I hear guns. That's how much I cannot stand guns, right? And there's a lot of, and he goes, I cringe when I was going to listen to that podcast about guns, but because it was you, I listened to it because I know who you are. right? And that's why I'm going to be reaching out to everyone because they know who I am, right? From government and business, from all walks of life, volunteering. My wife's a strong Christian, and I'm spiritual. I'm spiritual, and my wife's a very strong Christian. We have two different realms when we look at life that way, but we come together and we do good things, right? And then from that's why that podcast on firearms, that business friend of mine said to me, he goes, I listened to the whole thing. And he goes, basically, you listen to understand, right? And he goes, I have a completely different perspective now. And he goes, thank you for that, right? So that's why this podcast is important, because we're going to get into some things here that I've written down. You have highlighted a lot of very, very key moments in our Canadian history. And those that don't recognize that, when you're going to look back in hindsight, you're going to see that Mr. Poilievre here, your member of parliament here, brought out a lot of historical. If there's not a statue with your quotes, and some of your quotes, we're going to make some funnies in here today, but some of your quotes were like bang on, but they should be quoted on a statue of you. And along with, there's some other things that you brought out that were like, it might not be funny. There's a funny one I liked in there, but direct, and that watchdog attitude you have, and you're right. You know what I mean? That is your job. And when you were hired in and you went in, and you are protecting every single Canadian. Doesn't matter what walk of life, what religion, what ethnicity, what color, we're all equal. And that's why what you're doing is you're representing the equilibrium, the balance within our nation, and that's what is needed. So when I looked at, there's a thing, the unprecedented act of bad faith of Mr. Trudeau's government, right? So, and again, I'm speaking balance here today. I want to stay partisan, or however you want to see it, but I'm going to bring up facts that could have been detrimental to our Canadian economy and so forth, or if you're not there, what would happen? If you weren't there, what would happen? So the unprecedented act of bad faith in the Trudeau government, when they presented that bill, they tried to present that bill, and I believe you and your team and your team of conservatives, that you uncovered, like, it was a chaotic moment, right, in March. It was a chaotic moment in the world, like going back to your 1930s, 20s pandemic type state, your World War type state of okay, this is what's going on globally. It's fragmented, but it's chaotic, right? And in that moment, they tried to slip in a carte blanche spending. And when I say carte blanche, basically they could have done anything and everything they wanted to do with our taxes or fees, with everything, without any permission whatsoever. And I want you to elaborate on that and educate the people on the grassroots, because you explain things really that everybody understands what that would have meant, right? Because they would have had full carte blanche, correct? How did that happen? Because that could have slipped in, but there was changes made because of what was found, correct?
Yes, so the COVID pandemic hit in mid-March, and Parliament was shutting down to avoid transmitting among politicians and their staff on Parliament Hill. So the government needed money to keep the lights on while Parliament was at home. And so they put forward a bill that would have given when we were prepared to do that, we understood that we needed to give them money. Somebody had to authorize public servants to get their paychecks, and Canadians to get pandemic relief, etc. That said, what the Liberals tried to do is take bloody-minded advantage of the crisis by giving themselves the power to raise any tax at any time, in any amount, for any reason, until the year 2022. So almost 2 years with the unrestrained ability to raise your taxes, to raise, if they wanted to, the GST, income taxes, take away the exemption of tax on the value of your primary residence, business taxes, border taxes, every tax that you pay, they would have had the legal power to raise without any authorization from the House of Commons. Now, some people might think, well, governments can raise taxes anytime they want. No, that's not true. You can't raise taxes in our system without Parliament's approval. It's called the power of the purse. And it's an 800-year-old principle. It goes back to the time when King John tried to pay his war debts by arbitrarily raising taxes on the commoners of England, and they forced him into the field of Runnymede, and he was compelled to sign something called the Magna Carta, the Great Charter. Among many, and in that charter, we have many of the most important freedoms that we celebrate today. Amazingly, they were conceived of on that field. The freedom from arrest without warrant, confiscation without compensation, trial without jury, and taxation without representation. All of those things were embedded in that original charter, the Great Charter, the Magna Carta. 800 years, our system of government has been based on the notion that the crown cannot tax what the people have not approved. The mechanism to approve is in the House of Commons, where the common people are. They wanted to abolish that 800-year-old tradition. They wanted to use a pandemic when people were terrified for their lives and livelihoods as an opportunity to seize powers that had been won and defended through bloodshed for centuries. In the dark of night, in the middle of a pandemic crisis. That was the first thing on their mind when the pandemic happened. The first thing on their mind was not, how do we protect our seniors in long-term care? How do we get tests up and running? How do we save businesses and livelihoods? No, their first thought went to, how can we use this to seize the power, to dig as deep as we want in the pockets of people in Canada. So we stood up to them and said, hell no, we're not going to let this pass. We're going to defend taxpayers and our freedoms. And we forced them to back down, and that power was removed from the COVID response bill, Bill C-13, which passed in late March of 2020. So we managed to defend that ancient liberty that has been passed down generation to generation. It's always important to remember that our freedoms might be 800 years long. They might be hundreds of generations long, but they are only one generation deep. And if you take those freedoms away, you can break that chain that has extended over the centuries from that green field at Runnymede to the present. And we will, in breaking that chain, have broken faith with our ancestors, with those who came before us, but also with those who are yet to come.
And speaking to all Canadians here, and there's a reason why my flag is behind me, and I said this earlier, right? And this is to all Canadians and to all countries. If you're American, if you're Uruguayan, if you're European, if your governance, your people, and what you said, an 800-year-old tradition. Mm-hmm. Right? And if I'm going to break this down, I want to all business owners or family owners or people that have just, if you're alone in your own household and you manage your own bills and you're very efficient at it and you do your things, and somebody can just come in and start take control of your credit card, take control of your spending, take control of your business direction, take control of everything without your word, without you having any input whatsoever, would you allow that? And they wouldn't. Nobody would. No. You wouldn't have picked that up, and your team wouldn't have picked that up, and you guys wouldn't have made that change. Now, think about hindsight. When people say hindsight, well, we have foresight. A lot of people have foresight, right? So are you kidding me? I'm going to give you full control. I wouldn't give full control to anyone for the next 2 years, right? And that's why there's a process, and you're going to follow that process. It's been in place for 800 years. You want to break that process? You want to have full carte blanche at all their credit cards and at all their spendings and all their taxes, all their laws? Like, think about that, right? In there, you made a statement on one of your online video, and you said, "For God's sakes," and you stood up and you said, "The British Parliament met in London, England, during the Nazi air raids of when the British capital of World War II, right? And you pushed them to get this." Your point was true, right? Like they're playing that game. They're playing games. There's a lot of stuff that happens in Parliament. So, and the reason why that happened is that they don't want it to come to light, or they want to grab that rein and hold on to those reins, like you said, and dig deep, right? But you were right. Like if they're able to meet in World War II while they're being air raided, right? We're able to meet and get this change.
Absolutely. Okay. Churchill stood in abandoned cathedrals of London because the British Parliament was too easy a target for the Nazi Luftwaffe. But as the city of London was being pounded from the skies, Churchill didn't go scurrying into a cave somewhere and hide from democracy and accountability. No, he said, we will meet in church halls, and I will face the questions of the commoners. I will be accountable day by day for how I'm prosecuting the war against Hitler and the Nazis. And this is because Churchill had a deep understanding and a deep, profound respect for the common people. He would go out, not only would he stand in the House of Commons, which was in a church hall, while the walls were rattling with nearby explosions, and the dust was fluttering from above onto the parliamentarians below. Not only did he have the courage to do that, he went out into the bombed out communities, and he spoke with the locals whose lives had been ruined by the attack from the air. One of the greatest moments in his life that very few people know about, and it's captured in a wonderful documentary on him, is that of how he was in London, and there was a lady who was trapped under the rubble, but she was still alive. A voice was heard beneath the rubble, and all the workers ran over to try and scrape away the rubble, and he along with them helped liberate her from all of this stone and dust and rock that had fallen on her. And they rolled her over onto a stretcher, and she looked him in the eye, and her eyes were full of tears, and as were his, and she said, "Thank you." And he was totally speechless. But as she was being carried away, he said, "There goes greatness. There goes greatness." See, this is a man who had the ability to walk with kings, but never lost the common touch. He always saw the greatness in the common people, the people we walk past on the street every day, the genius of and the courage of those people who fought their way, and who the very next day after their homes were bombed out, they were back on their feet, going to work, continuing their lives as though nothing had happened. These were Churchill's heroes. It wasn't the aristocrats and the elites who hid away in their country estates that he loved. It was the common people in the inner cities whose lives were being destroyed, but who refused to be destroyed themselves because of their stern, stout, stubborn courage.
You know, and I said to you earlier, you're the boots on the ground, but the executive that stands up for us, right? And that's what that is, right? And then right there, when you first of all, like that when I look at myself as a 54-year-old man, I remember as a 16-year-old kid at this business that I was working at, and the owner at that time would have been probably my age, came out, and I was sweeping the parking lot. He started sweeping with me, and he started conversing with me, right? And I've met a lot of men like that in my life, a lot of women like that in my life. I'm a strong advocate. I tell them I raise my daughters hard in the sense of I made them understand I do not want you to walk behind anybody in life. You can walk beside somebody or ahead of someone, giddy up. Never let anybody pull you back, right? And I always tell them, be part of a nation or live in a nation where they respect women. Because if you look at their democracy, it's a much more balanced democracy, right? And I go back to you, thank you for bringing that up, because when I ran the prisons, I was deputy of operations and working with my team over there, with the officers and the institution, but I was in a position of management. I used to go through the dorms. I've always done that. It didn't matter. You know, you follow the process, but I walked through everything. I go through everywhere because that was my job. Right? I worked in treatment centers, assessment units. I understand mental health really, really well. I understand with I believe in programs. Like I've seen a recidivism rate 30%, and a lot of people don't. We just like your social insurance number, an inmate number follows them. And we would at a place like Rideau Correctional Treatment Center and assessment unit, the programs that the inmates would go through, they would go through a program of either like trade shops or sheet metal or for carpentry, etc. But they would accumulate their hours. So when they would leave in 2 years, they had 2 years of hours of apprenticeship, right, with their tickets and that. And or if they went through a treatment program, the abuse program and so forth, we were teaching them tools. Those that left either one of those types of programs, 30% recidivism difference from coming back. into the institutions, right?
Wow.
It's huge. And that's why I believe in programs done efficiently. And that's why I believe in an efficient government that run the thing efficiently. That's why when you see the Churchill about the boots on the ground and that kind of stuff, I look at that. And that's why I look at you that way. Because you made a comparison the other day, like the GDP, the gross domestic products, when you were their adjusted rates of today, we are now in this country, and if I again, I wrote this down here quickly, but we're twice that GDP of World War I, 3 times that of the Great Depression, 4 times that of the global recession. But in 1943, you made a comparison, and I thought of my father when you made that comparison, because I was raised that way, right? My father raised me to focus on facts, right? To focus on the truth. And do you know that to be true? And he caught me saying something one day, and he goes, "Do you know that to be true?" I said, I was repeating what my sister said. He goes, "Do you know that to be true?" And I couldn't answer him because he's a strong, driven man. And I said, and I looked at him, and he goes, "Unless you know that to be true, don't repeat it. Unless you know that it's affected somebody you love and respect, don't repeat it." He goes, "Millions died because of words." Right? Here's a man that fought a war. Millions have died just because of war. And when you mentioned a moment ago that 800-year tradition, and you can change it just like that by the flick of a pen, right? And then you did the 1943 comparison, 23% of the GDP. It was that at that time, the mindset, and this I'm speaking to all Canadians and all people of the world, at that time, they turned that around. The people turned that around. Within 1 year, they repaid it. In 2 years, it was a larger budget surplus in Canadian history, correct?
That's right. Yes, we had the way you measure deficits over time is as how big they are as a share of your GDP. So right now, our deficit is 17% of our economy, our federal deficit. That compares to 8% of our economy in World War I, 6% of our economy in the Great Depression, 4% of our economy in the Great Recession. So that's adjusted for inflation and the size of the economy. The biggest deficit ever was 1943. That was the only deficit that was bigger than the one we have now. Of course, that was right smack in the middle of the Second World War, when our ancestors were fighting Hitler, Mussolini, and Imperial Japan, and the government was selling war bonds to borrow the money to pay for that war effort. Biggest deficit ever. But here's the difference between then and now. After the war ended in 1945, it took only 1 year for our grandparents to balance the budget, to erase that monstrous deficit. They did it in 1 year. And 2 years total from the end of the war, they were running the biggest single budget surplus ever. So they went from the biggest deficit to the biggest surplus in 4 years, from 1943 to 1947. The biggest surplus ever. Why? Because our soldiers, rather than coming back exhausted as they were from war and going on a gigantic debt-fueled vacation while they rested and repaired their bodies and souls, they went right back to work. They had the courage to turn their attention to protecting our future. They had fought for our freedom, and then they fought for our finances. And by 1947, they were running this massive surplus, the equivalent, 5% of GDP, the equivalent to $120 billion in today's money, to start paying off the war debts that they had accumulated protecting our freedom. They did not want to leave us saddled with the cost of the war. They wanted future generations to enjoy the blessings of freedom in a prosperous land. And I think, wouldn't it be wonderful if we had leaders like that today who had the same courage and self-sacrifice to protect future generations rather than saddling them with endless and perilous debt, as Trudeau now does to our future.
And you know, and that mindset, I was raised hard. And when my father was 80, I thanked him. I did a party in my house, and I thanked him for raising me so hard because he made me who I am. And I have my mother's heart and my father's mind, but he raised me in the sense I never gave an allowance. And he always told me, you're going to get up in the morning, you're going to earn your own way, and you're going to open your own doors through life, right? That's how he raised me. And that mindset you just mentioned, that was that mindset. And that, and I call myself, people, I've been asked me to get into politics, and I always say, I don't want to get into politics, but I want to lead from behind, right? And we have great politicians already, and I say this, to yourself, because you have some very, very strong, good politicians out there, and strong teams, and that's what you need in power, because when you have individuals in that admiral position, we'll call it, right, leading, it makes a hell of a difference. And I'm speaking to all Canadians here. You need people that know. I'm going to start quoting some of your statements here. Like right now, you're a shadow minister with Mr. O'Toole, correct?
Yes.
Right. And I hope that I love. I was taught this in government. I was taught this by a peer of mine, my manager at the time, my boss, superintendent, and I told him that he mentored me, and I was a young 24-year-old at the time, 26-year-old, and much later in life, about 20 years later, 25 years later, I had him at the house, and I told him that I use that skill all the time. And he goes, I never knew you had that skill. I go, well, you taught me that. I used to observe. I'm very, call me a dyslexic mind, whatever you want. I learned to harness it when I was young, and I pay attention a lot. I read people's eyes. I read emotion. I taught situational awareness around this product. I'm very, very interconnected, but I pick up a lot of skill. And with the skill that he had, he was always putting the people in the right lane, the right person in the right lane. And there's a lane for you, and that watchdog lane that you have, and that knowledge that you have, and that skill set that you have, you're very witty, and you're on them because you came in prepared. So I'm gonna start quoting in some of your statements that I said that you should have a statue one day, a statue of your honor. But when you were grilling Mr. Bill Morneau, and this is what I'm speaking to all Canadians here, and anybody in your world and globally. When you need to protect your country, you need to protect the fabric, integral part of your nation, your foundation. Without your foundation, I don't care what you build above it. If you don't have a strong foundation, it starts falling apart, right? So you start answer the question. That should be one of your thing. Like, answer the question. You've used that many times with specific types of questions that are needed to be answered. And when you grill them on that and you said answer the question, Canadians were listening, right? And that group of gentlemen that came to my house they do the integrity march, and when we were talking about politics and politicians, and your name came up in a conversation through them, and I said, well, actually, Mr. Poilievre is in Ottawa. He's in the Greeley area, blah blah. This is where they lit up like Christmas trees, right? Because of how you speak and how you go after the facts and through research, right? And the display of the blackout documents, your question when you started the throwing of the papers, right, and all blacked out. Why was it all blacked out? And you could explain, like, if you want to just explain the answer to the question and the blackout, because I want to go into other things and these quotes, but those two things are very, like, there's a reason why it was blacked out, and that temporary moment. If you want to get into that and the answer to the question, and look what happened with Mr. Morneau, right? And it's because of individuals like yourself, Mr. Poilievre, and because you're on them. Otherwise, it gets lost in limbo. If we don't have individuals like yourself that are watchdogs and your team that are constantly on this, like, we'd have a parliament would have the control over all our money, and we have individuals that just got resigned. Because, do you know what I mean? If you weren't there, people tell you you're a watchdog in the House of Parliament. That's needed. That is needed. So explain the answer to the question and explain all the blackouts.
Well, we asked for all the documents related to the WE scandal. That's the scandal where the Prime Minister stepped in to give $500 million to a group that had given his family $500,000. They gave us a bunch of documents that were blacked out. I think there were 5,000 documents total, and thousands of the pages were just black, or key parts of the pages were black. So they certainly are keeping the ink factories in business here in Ottawa. So I basically exposed that he was covering something up. There's obviously something to hide behind all of that black ink. I don't know what it is. Certainly, it can't be a matter of national security to tell us all the steps that went into giving this money to this group. I don't know what national security or commercial sensitivity could possibly be hidden behind those pages. So basically, I told the world that there was a cover-up and did it in the most vivid way humanly possible. My methodology of inquisition in the House of Commons is a very simple one. I'm just a simple boy from the prairies. I grew up in Calgary. I love the simple, direct approach of my prairie ancestors. That's why they were so great and so successful, because they knew that most of the beautiful things in life are the simplest things. I asked questions in the House of Commons the way my mother asked me questions when I came home at 2 a.m. and tried to sneak in through the window, and I was a 15-year-old kid. The questions weren't complicated. They're very simple. Where were you? Really? You were just next door? Really? That's funny. Their lights are off next door. Where were you really? Were you drinking? What did you drink? If you got a bottle from somewhere, where did you get that bottle? Who are you with? Was the troublemaker from down the street with you? Those are all the very simple questions your mother asks you when you sneak in at 2 a.m. and you weren't supposed to be out. None of those questions are complicated. Most of them are yes or no, or they involve a place, a date, a time, or some other binary yes or no question. So think of when you want to be a good cross-examiner, think of how your mother did it when it was 2 a.m. and you snuck back into the house at age 15. That is the best way to conduct a parliamentary interrogation. Simple questions, simple facts, because the simplest things are the best.
And this is where the we scandal. Okay, my daughter. My daughter is 15, my other daughter is 13, and they participated in some school stuff with we back in the day. And then recently, when all this happened in the last few months, and then she was asking, what's going on with the we? And I was explaining to her, she goes, wait. She goes, the charity money? Like with the children, the charity money? I said, yeah, the charity money. I said, not the taxation money, not the fees money now we're going after charity money. And she goes, she was like looking at me like, who would do that, right? This is children, because there's a message there, right? This is about youth. This is about, we're like, just like you when you were a young politician, in school, that kind of stuff, and you start growing, right? That's where you're tainting that, is what she's saying. You're staining that, really? Right? That's that's where people, and then from there, you had direct questions to our prime minister, and those direct questions to our prime minister for it was that here's some of your coining phrase: nobody believes you, how much, the dollar figure, I'm waiting, you, and then the other one, I'm waiting, you haven't done an answer so far, let's make this the first one, right? Those right there in that one interview, because you wanted an answer. The people of this country want an answer, right? My daughter wanted an answer from me that I couldn't give her. I couldn't give her the answer. And again, I speak from knowledge and experience or research or backup. So I can't tell her something that I don't know. So I said, I don't know.
That's right. So listen, that's why, and I will unfortunately have to wrap up because I have to go into a constituent call, but the key here is to just ask simple questions. A lot of people say, well, what happens when they don't answer the question? Well, you ask it again. You ask it multiple times, as simply as possible, and the non-answer is an answer. A non-answer is an answer. It tells you everything you need to know. So I'm going to keep asking those tough questions, and until such time as Canadians put us in the position to serve them in government, and then we will be there to provide answers. And I look forward to providing those answers to get our country back on its track and fulfilling its full potential, and put the people back in charge of our country again.
Well, I'm going to thank you on behalf of all Canadians, Mr. Poilievre, and I'm glad Mr. O'Toole took you as you're part of his team, because I speak from experience when I say my sister, 35 years in Privy Council, when I was a young lad, she told me how hard politicians work. And she explained to me how your life is not yours. It's basically scheduled. And just like this example here, you have to go. Your life is scheduled, and you're a hard worker, but you go in prepared every time. And please continue to do so on behalf of all Canadians, from all walks of life, from all aspects. Thank you. And thank you for your time.
And I look forward to seeing the broadcast, and let's stay in close contact. And maybe one day you can show me a few moves in the ring. Hopefully not
I'm going
directly
tonight.
at
I'm
you.
going tonight, so I'll talk to them about you.
Tell them I'm going to come see them soon. I'm looking forward to it, and keep the fight alive.
I promise. And likewise. Okay. Thank you, sir.
Many blessings. Bye now.
Bye-bye. Thank you.